The fluorescent lights of the emergency room cast harsh shadows across Dr. Sarah Mitchell's face as she worked with steady hands on her latest patient. Blood stained her scrubs, but her movements remained precise and calculated. Around her, the chaos of a busy Friday night in downtown Chicago's trauma center continued its relentless pace. Sirens wailed outside, gurneys rolled past, and the constant chatter of medical staff filled the air. Sarah had been working as an emergency room physician for 3 years now, ever since she left the military. The transition from combat medic to civilian doctor hadn't been easy, but she had found her rhythm in this controlled chaos. The ER was different from the battlefield, yet somehow familiar. Lives hung in the balance, split-second decisions mattered, and her training kicked in automatically when things got intense. "Dr. Mitchell, we got incoming," called out Nurse Janet Rodriguez from across the room. "Multiple GSWs, ETA, 2 minutes." Sarah nodded, finishing the sutures on her current patient's arm. The young man had been in a motorcycle accident, nothing too serious, but it required careful attention. As she worked, her mind was already shifting to prepare for the next challenge. Gunshot wounds were always complicated, requiring quick assessment and immediate action. The automatic doors burst open as the paramedics rushed in with their first patient. Sarah's trained eye immediately assessed the situation as they transferred the victim to the trauma bay. Male, approximately 30 years old, conscious but pale with what appeared to be a through wound to the shoulder. "What do we have?" Sarah asked, pulling on fresh gloves as she approached the gurney. 32-year-old male, single GSW to the left shoulder, stable vitals en route, reported the lead paramedic. "He's been conscious the whole time, minimal blood loss." As Sarah began her examination, she noticed something immediately striking about her patient. Despite the obvious pain he had to be experiencing, he remained completely calm and focused. His breathing was controlled, his eyes alert, and scanning the room in a way that seemed almost tactical. There was something about his bearing, his posture, even while lying wounded, that seemed familiar. "What's your name?" Sarah asked gently as she examined the wound. "Marcus Thompson," he replied, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "And thank you, document. I can tell you know what you're doing." There was something in his tone, a certain cadence and formality that made Sarah pause for just a moment. She had heard that same tone countless times before, in another place, another life. The way he addressed her, the respect mixed with professional assessment in his voice, triggered memories she usually kept carefully locked away. "Have you been in the military, Marcus?" she asked as she worked, her hands moving efficiently to clean and assess the wound. "Navy SEAL, 15 years, he confirmed. Just retired last month, actually. Still getting used to civilian life." Sarah's hands never stopped moving, but something shifted inside her chest. She had treated many veterans since starting work at the hospital, but there was something different about Marcus. Maybe it was the timing, maybe it was the way he carried himself even while injured, or maybe it was just one of those moments when the past refuses to stay buried. "This is going to hurt a bit," she warned as she began irrigating the wound. "The bullet went clean through, which is good news. No major damage to bone or major blood vessels for what I can see." Marcus nodded, accepting the information with the same calm demeanor he had maintained since arrival. "I've had worse," he said simply. As Sarah continued her examination, she found herself studying his face more carefully. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting against desert sun and foreign skies. A small scar above his left eyebrow suggested previous close calls. His hands, she noticed, bore the calluses and small scars that came from handling weapons and equipment in harsh conditions. "Where did you serve?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't entirely sure why she was prolonging the conversation. Usually, she kept things professional and efficient. "Afghanistan mostly. 3 deployments. Some work in Iraq and Syria as well," Marcus replied. "What about you, Doc? You got the look." Sarah's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. It was a question she had been asked before by other veterans, and she had developed standard responses that deflected without lying. But Something about Marcus's direct gaze made her usual deflections feel inadequate. "I did some medical work overseas," she said carefully, returning her focus to his wound. "Nothing like what you guys went through." Marcus studied her face with the same intensity she had been observing him. There was intelligence in his eyes and something else. Recognition, perhaps. Or maybe just the natural suspicion of someone trained to read people and situations quickly. "Combat medic?" he asked quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her chest tighten slightly, the way it always did when someone got too close to the truth. She worked so hard to keep compartmentalized. Her military service felt like another lifetime, another person entirely. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was calm, professional, and in control. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell had been someone else entirely. Army, she admitted finally, still not looking up from her work. 2 deployments to Afghanistan. When Marcus's voice had changed slightly, becoming more focused, more intense. 2018 to 2020, Sarah replied. She began preparing the materials she would need to close his wound. "I'm going to need to put in some stitches. The local anesthetic should kick in shortly." But Marcus wasn't ready to let the conversation shift back to purely medical matters. "Forward operating base Shank." The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked up sharply, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since he had mentioned being a SEAL. FOB Shank. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 3 years. The memories came flooding back despite her attempts to keep them at bay. The dusty compound, the constant threat of incoming mortars, the makeshift medical facility where she had spent 18 months saving lives, and watching others slip away despite her best efforts. "You were there," she said. It wasn't a question. "March 2019, Marcus confirmed. My team was operating out of there for about 6 weeks. There was a medic there, saved 3 of my guys after an IED hit our convoy. Told us her name was Mitchell." Sarah's hands had stopped moving entirely now. She stared at Marcus, searching his face, trying to place him among the hundreds of soldiers she had treated during her time at Shank. The base had been a hub for various special operations teams, and she had seen SEALs come through regularly, usually with injuries that required her particular expertise in combat trauma. "The IED on Route Tiger," she said slowly. 3 casualties, 1 critical with abdominal trauma. "Rodriguez," Marcus said immediately. "Danny Rodriguez. You worked on him for 2 hours. Doctor said later that if you hadn't been there, if you hadn't known exactly what to do, he wouldn't have made it to the hospital in Kandahar." The memory came back with startling clarity. She remembered that day, remembered the desperate race against time as she worked to stabilize the young SEAL whose internal injuries threatened to kill him before they could get him proper surgical care. She remembered the other SEALs standing by, watching with the particular kind of intense focus that special operations soldiers brought to everything they did. "How is he?" Sarah asked quietly. "Married, 2 kids, working as a police officer in San Diego," Marcus replied. "Thanks to you." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying. In the chaotic aftermath of that deployment, she had rarely learned the long-term outcomes for the soldiers she treated. They would come to her broken and bleeding, she would patch them up to the best of her ability, and then they would disappear back into the war zone. The not knowing had been one of the hardest parts of the job. "I remember you now," she said, the recognition finally clicking into place. "You were the team leader. You carried him to the aid station yourself. Couldn't leave him behind," Marcus said simply. "None of us could. But you, Doc, you were something else. Cool as ice under pressure. I've never seen anyone work like that." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Praise for her military service always made her uncomfortable. There were aspects of her deployment that she was proud of, but there were also memories that kept her awake at night, decisions that haunted her, faces of soldiers she hadn't been able to save. "I was just doing my job," she said, returning her attention to his wound. "No," Marcus said firmly. "You were doing a lot more than that. I've seen a lot of medics in my time document what you did out there, the way you handled things. That wasn't just following procedure. That was someone who genuinely cared about getting everyone home." As Sarah worked to close Marcus's wound, she found herself thinking about those days in Afghanistan. The intensity, the brotherhood, the sense of purpose that had driven her through 18 months of the most challenging work of her life. Coming home had been difficult in ways she hadn't expected. The civilian world felt strangely disconnected from the life and death reality she had grown accustomed to overseas. "Why emergency medicine?" Marcus asked, as if reading her thoughts. "It felt like the closest thing to what I knew," Sarah admitted. "The pace, the pressure, the need to make quick decisions. It's not the same as what we did over there, but it's familiar. Do you miss it?" The question was asked quietly, carefully. Sarah paused in her work, considering the question. It wasn't one she had asked herself directly very often. Missing the war felt wrong somehow, disrespectful to the soldiers who hadn't made it home. But missing the sense of purpose, the clarity of mission, the bonds forged in extreme circumstances, that was different. Sometimes, she said honestly, not the war itself, but the work. The feeling that what you were doing really mattered. That every decision could be the difference between someone going home or not. "It still matters," Marcus said. "What you're doing here. This work matters too." Sarah finished the last stitch and began bandaging his shoulder. As she worked, she realized that this was the first time since coming home that she had talked openly about her deployment with anyone who had been there, who understood what it had really been like. Her family and friends had tried to be supportive, but there was a gap in understanding that couldn't be bridged with good intentions alone. "There," she said, stepping back to examine her work. "That should hold. You'll need to keep it dry for the next week, and I want to see you back here in 5 days to check the healing." "Thank you, Doc," Marcus said, carefully sitting up. "And not just for this," he added, gesturing to his shoulder. "For everything. For what you did over there. And for taking care of me here." As Sarah helped him with his discharge paperwork, she found herself reluctant to let this connection end. It had been a long time since she had felt truly understood by anyone, and the unexpected reunion with someone who had been part of her military family felt like a gift she hadn't known she needed. "Marcus," she said as he prepared to leave, "I meant what I said about following up. Combat injuries can be tricky, even ones that look straightforward." "I'll be here," he promised. Wouldn't want to disappoint the doc who saved Rodriguez. After he left, Sarah stood in the trauma bay for a long moment, processing what had just happened. The emergency room around her continued its familiar chaos, but something had shifted. For the first time in 3 years, she felt a connection to her past that didn't bring only pain and regret. She thought about Danny Rodriguez, married with children, building a life far from the dangers they had all faced together. She thought about Marcus, adjusting to civilian life just as she had tried to do. And for the first time in a long time, she thought about her deployment not just as something to be survived and left behind, but as a period of her life that had meaning and value. The night continued around her, bringing new patients and new challenges. But as Sarah worked, she found herself thinking about the invisible threads that connected all the people whose lives had intersected in that dusty forward operating base, so far from home. Tonight, one of those threads had been revealed, and it felt like a reminder that some bonds, forged in the crucible of shared service and sacrifice, never really break. She realized she was looking forward to seeing Marcus again in 5 days, not just to check on his medical progress, but to continue a conversation that had barely begun. For the first time since coming home, Sarah Mitchell felt like someone might understand both who she had been and who she was trying to become. 5 days passed slower than Sarah had expected. She found herself checking the emergency room schedule repeatedly, wondering when Marcus would arrive for his follow-up appointment. The encounter had stirred something in her that she couldn't quite name, a mixture of nostalgia, curiosity, and an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. She had been thinking about Afghanistan more than usual, remembering not just the difficult moments, but also the camaraderie and the profound sense of purpose that had defined those months. When Marcus finally walked through the doors of the emergency department, Sarah felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness. She had been treating patients for years without giving it a second thought, but somehow this felt different. This wasn't just a medical follow-up. It was a continuation of a conversation that had awakened parts of herself she had thought were permanently dormant. "Right on time," Sarah said with a smile as she approached him. "How has the shoulder been feeling?" "Good as new, Doc," Marcus replied, though Sarah noticed he was being careful with his movements. "Well, almost as good as new. Better than I expected, honestly." As they made their way to an examination room, Sarah found herself studying Marcus more carefully than she had during their first encounter. Without the urgency of treating an acute injury, she could see more clearly the way he carried himself. There was a confidence in his movements that spoke of years of physical training and discipline, but also a wariness that she recognized from her own mirror. It was the look of someone who had seen too much and was still learning how to exist in a world where danger didn't lurk around every corner. "Let's take a look at that wound," Sarah said, beginning to unwrap the bandage. As she worked, she was pleased to see that the healing was progressing exactly as it should. The edges of the wound were clean, with no signs of infection, and the tissue was knitting together properly. "You heal fast," she observed. "But I suppose that's not surprising given your background." "Years of practice," Marcus said with a slight grin. "Plus, I had excellent medical care." As Sarah cleaned the wound and applied a fresh bandage, she found herself curious about Marcus's adjustment to civilian life. She remembered her own struggles with the transition, the way everything had seemed simultaneously too quiet and too chaotic, too safe, and somehow threatening in unexpected ways. "How are you finding retirement?" she asked. "The adjustment can be challenging." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "It's strange," he admitted finally. 15 years of structure, clear mission objectives, knowing exactly what was expected of me every day. Now I wake up, and I have to figure out what to do with myself." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. "I remember that feeling. The first few months were the hardest for me. I kept feeling like I should be somewhere else, doing something more important." "Exactly," Marcus said, relief evident in his voice. "People keep telling me I should be grateful to be safe, to have routine, to not have to worry about getting shot at. And I am grateful, but it's also empty," Sarah suggested. "That's exactly the word," Marcus confirmed. "I know I'm lucky to be here, to have made it through all those deployments without serious injury. But I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that luck." As Sarah finished examining his shoulder, she realized how much she had needed this conversation. In the 3 years since her discharge, she had spoken with other veterans, participated in support groups, and even sought counseling. But none of those interactions had felt as natural as this exchange with someone who had shared not just the general experience of military service, but the specific intensity of combat deployment in the same place and time. "Have you thought about what you want to do next?" Sarah asked. "Career-wise, I mean." "I've been looking into private security work, maybe overseas contracting," Marcus replied. "It's what I know, and the money is good. But honestly, the idea of going back to war zones as a civilian feels wrong somehow. Like I'd be there for the wrong reasons." Sarah understood the conflict he was describing. The skills they had developed in the military were valuable, but using them purely for financial gain rather than service felt like a betrayal of something important. She had struggled with similar questions about her own career path, wondering if her choice to work in emergency medicine was really about helping people or just about recreating the familiar intensity of her deployment experience. "What about you?" Marcus asked. "Do you think about going back?" "Military medicine, I mean. There are always opportunities for experienced combat medics." The question caught Sarah off guard. She had thought about it, of course, especially during the first difficult months of adjustment. The military had offered her opportunities to re-enlist, to continue her medical training while serving, to take on leadership roles in military hospitals. The idea of returning to a world where her skills and experience were not just valued, but essential had been tempting. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted, "but I'm not sure I could handle another deployment. The things we saw, the decisions we had to make. I'm not sure I have another one of those in me." Marcus nodded slowly. "I know what you mean. Some of the things we had to do, some of the things we couldn't do, it changes you." There was something in his tone that made Sarah look at him more carefully. She had heard that note of pain in the voices of other veterans, and she had felt it in her own throat often enough to recognize it. It was the sound of someone carrying memories that were too heavy to set down, but too painful to examine closely. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "There was an op about a month before we met you. We were supposed to extract a high-value target from a compound in Helmand Province. Intelligence said it would be minimal resistance, quick in and out." Sarah waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. She had learned during her own processing of difficult memories that sometimes the most important thing was just having someone who would listen without judgment. "It was a setup," Marcus continued. "The compound was full of civilians, families, women, and children, but the target was there too, and he started using them as human shields. We had to make a choice between completing the mission and protecting innocents." "What did you choose?" Sarah asked softly. "We chose the innocents," Marcus said immediately. "No question. But the target got away, and 2 weeks later he was involved in an attack on a convoy that killed 6 American soldiers and 12 Afghan nationals. Those 18 people died because we chose to protect the families in that compound." Sarah felt the familiar ache of moral injury, the particular pain that came from impossible choices where every option led to harm. She had faced similar moments during her deployment, times when saving one life meant she couldn't save another, when the resources and time she spent on one patient might mean she couldn't help the next one through the door. "You made the right choice," she said firmly. "You can't be responsible for what that man did after you let him go. You saved innocent lives." "I know that here," Marcus said, tapping his temple. "But here," he placed his hand over his heart, "it feels different. Those 6 soldiers had families too. They had people waiting for them to come home." Sarah reached out and placed her hand on his arm, a gesture that surprised both of them with its spontaneity. "The fact that you feel that weight, that you care about all those lives, that's what made you a good soldier. That's what made your team trust you to make those impossible decisions." Marcus looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "How do you do it? How do you carry all of that and still function every day?" It was a question Sarah had asked herself countless times, and she still wasn't sure she had a good answer. "Some days are better than others," she said honestly. "Some days I feel like I'm honoring the people we lost by continuing to save lives here. Other days I feel like I'm just hiding from what I experienced over there." "Does it get easier?" Marcus asked. "Different," Sarah replied. "Not easier, exactly, but different. The sharp edges of the memories soften a bit. You learn to function around them instead of being paralyzed by them." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah realized that this was the first time since her discharge that she had felt truly understood by someone. The weight she had been carrying felt somehow lighter when it was shared with someone who carried similar burdens. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," Marcus said eventually. "About the work here matching. I've been coming by the hospital every few days, just sitting in the waiting room, watching." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's not creepy at all," she said with a slight smile. Marcus laughed, the first genuine laugh she had heard from him. "I know how it sounds, but I wanted to see what you meant. And you're right. The work you do here, it does matter. I watched you save a kid who came in after a car accident. Saw you talk a panic attack victim through their crisis. Watched you coordinate care for a homeless man who probably hadn't seen a doctor in years." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had chosen emergency medicine partly because it felt like the civilian equivalent of combat medicine. But she had sometimes wondered if she was just chasing the adrenaline rush rather than truly serving others. "I've been thinking too," she said, "about what we talked about purpose and mission. Maybe the mission doesn't have to end just because we're not in uniform anymore." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "I mean, maybe the skills we learned, the experiences we had, maybe they're not just baggage to carry around. Maybe they're tools we can use to keep serving, just in different ways." Marcus considered this, his expression thoughtful. Like continuing the mission on the home front. Something like that, Sarah agreed. I don't know exactly what it would look like, but I've been thinking that there have to be other veterans out there who are struggling with the same things we are. People who need medical care, but don't know how to navigate the system, or who are dealing with injuries that civilian doctors don't understand. A clinic, Marcus suggested. Something specifically for veterans? Sarah felt excitement building as the idea took shape in her mind. Maybe, or maybe something bigger. A resource center, a place where veterans could get medical care, counseling, job placement assistance, whatever they need to successfully transition to civilian life. For the first time since she had known him, Marcus's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. You can make that work. With your medical background and knowledge of military culture, you understand both sides of the equation. We could make it work, Sarah corrected. I know medicine, but you know leadership, logistics, operations. You know how to take an idea and turn it into reality. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see him processing the implications of what she was suggesting. It was a big idea, the kind of project that would require significant commitment and resources. But it was also the kind of mission that could give purpose and meaning to the skills and experiences they had gained during their military service. "You're serious about this," he said finally. "I think I am," Sarah replied, somewhat surprised by her own certainty. "I've been feeling lost since I came home, like I was just going through the motions. But talking to you, thinking about the other veterans who might need help, it feels like maybe there's still work for us to do." Marcus extended his hand, and Sarah shook it, feeling the callous grip of someone who had spent years training for and executing dangerous missions. But this handshake felt different from a greeting. It felt like the beginning of something new, a partnership forged not in the chaos of combat, but in the quiet recognition of shared purpose. "Partners?" Marcus asked. "Partners," Sarah confirmed. As Marcus prepared to leave, they spent a few more minutes discussing practical details. How to research existing services for veterans, how to identify gaps in current resources, how to begin developing a business plan for their idea. The conversation felt natural and productive, like they had been working together for years rather than having reconnected just days earlier. After Marcus left, Sarah stood in the examination room for a moment, processing what had just happened. In the space of one follow-up appointment, she felt like her entire future had shifted. The idea of creating something meaningful, something that could help other veterans navigate the challenges she and Marcus had faced, filled her with an energy and excitement she hadn't felt in years. She thought about the soldiers she had treated at FOB Shank, wondering where they were now, what challenges they were facing, whether they had found ways to integrate their military experience into productive civilian lives. The idea that she and Marcus might be able to create something that could help people like them felt like a calling rather than just a career change. For the first time since coming home from Afghanistan, Sarah Mitchell felt like she knew exactly what she was supposed to do next. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah and Marcus had shaken hands on their partnership, and the idea that had begun as a spontaneous conversation in an examination room was slowly taking shape into something concrete. They had been meeting every few days at a small coffee shop near the hospital, spending hours researching existing veteran services, identifying gaps in care, and sketching out what their own organization might look like. Sarah found herself looking forward to these meetings with an anticipation that surprised her. For the first time since her discharge, she felt like she was working towards something meaningful rather than just maintaining her professional routine. Marcus brought a different perspective to their planning, approaching problems with the systematic thoroughness of someone trained to execute complex operations under pressure. "I've been thinking about staffing," Marcus said as they settled into their usual corner booth at the coffee shop. He spread several notebooks across the table, each filled with his careful handwriting. "If we're serious about this, we're going to need people who understand both military culture and civilian healthcare systems." Sarah nodded, sipping her coffee as she reviewed the list of potential services they had been developing. "I've been reaching out to some people from my residency program asking about their experiences with veteran patients. A lot of civilian doctors want to help, but they admit they don't always know how to connect with military patients. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Marcus said. It's not just about medical knowledge. It's about understanding the mindset, the culture, the specific challenges veterans face when they're trying to access care. Over the past weeks, they had discovered that while there were numerous programs available to help veterans, many were difficult to navigate, had long waiting lists, or were focused on specific issues rather than providing comprehensive support. Sarah had been particularly troubled by stories of veterans who avoided seeking medical care because they felt misunderstood or judged by civilian healthcare providers. "I got a call yesterday from Danny Rodriguez," Marcus said, referring to the SEAL whose life Sarah had saved at FOB Shank. "He's doing well, but he mentioned that it took him 2 years to find a doctor who understood his back injury from that IED blast. 2 years of chronic pain because he couldn't communicate effectively with civilian doctors about what had happened to him." Sarah felt a familiar surge of frustration. She had seen similar situations during her work in the emergency room. Veterans who struggled to explain their medical history or who seemed reluctant to provide complete information about their symptoms. The communication gap between military and civilian healthcare could have serious consequences for patient outcomes. "That's exactly why we need to do this," she said firmly. "We can bridge that gap. We can create a place where veterans don't have to translate their experiences or worry about being misunderstood." As they worked through their planning documents, Sarah found herself impressed by Marcus's attention to detail and strategic thinking. He approached their project with the same methodical precision she imagined he had brought to military operations, breaking down complex challenges into manageable components and developing systematic approaches to each issue. "I've been looking into funding options," Marcus said, pulling out another notebook. "There are grants available specifically for veteran-focused healthcare initiatives. The Department of Veterans Affairs has several programs, and there are private foundations that support projects like ours." Sarah had been researching the regulatory and licensing requirements for establishing a healthcare facility. The process was complex, but not insurmountable. More importantly, she had been reaching out to colleagues and former classmates, building a network of healthcare professionals who might be interested in participating in their project. "Dr. Williams from my residency program wants to meet with us," Sarah said. "She's been working on veteran healthcare policy issues, and she thinks our idea has real potential. She might be able to help us navigate some of the bureaucratic challenges." Marcus looked up from his notes with interest. That could be huge. Having someone with policy experience on our side would make a big difference. As they continued their planning, Sarah realized that their partnership was evolving beyond just professional collaboration. She found herself genuinely enjoying Marcus's company, appreciating his humor and insight in ways that had nothing to do with their shared military experience. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry wit that emerged during their longer conversations. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sarah said during a pause in their planning session. "Sure," Marcus replied, though she noticed a slight wariness in his expression. "Do you miss the teams? The close relationships? The brotherhood you had with the other SEALs?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "Every day," he said finally. "Those guys weren't just colleagues. They were family. We trusted each other with our lives on a regular basis. That kind of bond doesn't exist in the civilian world, at least not in the same way." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. She had felt the same loss when she left the military, the absence of relationships built on shared danger and mutual dependence. Her civilian friendships, while meaningful, lacked the intensity and depth of the bond she had formed with her fellow medics and the soldiers she had served alongside. "Do you think that's part of why this project feels so important to us?" she asked. "Are we trying to recreate that sense of mission and brotherhood?" Marcus considered this carefully. "Maybe partly," he admitted, "but I think it's more than that. I think we're trying to take the best parts of what we experienced in the military and apply them to civilian life. The sense of purpose, the commitment to service, the understanding that we're responsible for taking care of each other." Sarah felt something shift in her chest at his words, a recognition of something she hadn't been able to articulate. The military had given her not just training and experience, but also a framework for understanding her place in the world. Coming home had meant not just adjusting to a different pace of life, but also figuring out how to maintain her sense of purpose and identity without the clear structure of military service. "I think you're right," she said. "This feels like a way to honor what we learned over there, to make sure it wasn't wasted." Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing with an urgent message from the hospital. There had been a multi-vehicle accident, and all emergency room staff were being called in to handle the influx of casualties. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with emergency situations, but for the first time in months, she also felt reluctant to leave her conversation with Marcus. "I have to go," she said apologetically, gathering her things. "Of course," Marcus replied. "Lives to save." As Sarah hurried toward the hospital, she found herself thinking about the natural way Marcus had responded to her emergency, the immediate understanding that her medical responsibilities took precedence over everything else. It was the kind of automatic respect for mission priorities that she had grown accustomed to in the military, but rarely encountered in civilian relationships. The emergency room was organized chaos when she arrived, with multiple trauma bays occupied and a steady stream of ambulances delivering patients from the accident scene. Sarah immediately fell into the rhythm of emergency care, triaging patients, coordinating with specialists, and providing the kind of rapid, decisive medical intervention that had become second nature to her. As she worked on a patient with multiple fractures, Sarah found herself thinking about the veteran healthcare center she and Marcus were planning. She imagined being able to provide this same level of care specifically for veterans, creating an environment where military patients would feel understood and supported rather than having to explain their background and experiences to healthcare providers who had no frame of reference for their service. Several hours later, when the last patient from the accident had been stabilized and admitted, Sarah realized that Marcus was waiting in the hospital lobby. He stood when he saw her approaching, and she noticed that he had brought coffee for both of them. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing her a cup. "Long night." "Very," Sarah replied, grateful for the caffeine and touched by his thoughtfulness. "Multiple trauma cases, but everyone is stable now." They found a quiet corner of the lobby to sit and decompress. Sarah felt the familiar post-adrenaline exhaustion settling over her, but also the satisfaction that came from knowing she had made a difference in several people's lives that night. "Watching you work earlier reminded me of something," Marcus said. "The way you handled that emergency call, the immediate shift to mission focus. That's exactly the kind of mentality we need in our healthcare center." Sarah looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I mean the ability to prioritize, to make quick decisions under pressure, to function effectively in crisis situations. Those are all skills that military veterans have, but they're also skills that are incredibly valuable in healthcare settings." Sarah began to see where he was going with this line of thinking. "You're talking about hiring veterans as staff members, not just serving them as patients." "Exactly," Marcus said, his excitement evident. "Think about it. Who better to help veterans navigate healthcare challenges than other veterans who have been through the same experiences? And who better to work in high-stress medical situations than people who have been trained to function under extreme pressure?" The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Sarah had been focused primarily on the clinical aspects of their healthcare center, but Marcus was thinking about the entire ecosystem of support that veterans might need. By staffing their facility with veterans, they could create an environment where military patients would be understood not just by their healthcare providers, but by everyone they encountered. "We could have veteran nurses, administrative staff, even maintenance workers," Sarah said, building on the idea. "Everyone working there would understand military culture and could relate to the challenges veterans face in civilian life. And we could provide job training and placement assistance as part of our services," Marcus added. "Help veterans develop new skills while also creating a workforce that understands our patient population." Sarah felt excitement building as she considered the implications of this expanded vision. What they were discussing wasn't just a healthcare facility, but a comprehensive support system for veterans transitioning to civilian life. It was ambitious, perhaps even audacious, but it felt right in a way that their earlier plans hadn't quite captured. "This changes everything," she said. "This isn't just about providing medical care anymore. This is about creating a model for how veterans can support each other and continue serving their communities." Marcus nodded, his expression serious but hopeful. "It's bigger than we originally thought, but maybe that's what's needed. Maybe incremental improvements aren't enough. Maybe we need to think about fundamentally different approaches to veteran care." As they sat in the quiet hospital lobby, Sarah realized that their partnership had evolved far beyond what either of them had originally envisioned. They weren't just planning a business venture anymore. They were designing a mission that could have lasting impact on the lives of countless veterans. The magnitude of what they were considering was both intimidating and energizing. "Are we crazy to think we can pull this off?" Sarah asked. Marcus smiled, the confident expression she had learned to associate with his military leadership experience. "Maybe, but I've seen crazy plans work before. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most important victories." Sarah felt a surge of determination that reminded her of the moment she had decided to enlist in the Army. It was the feeling of committing to something larger than herself, something that would challenge her abilities but also give profound meaning to her work. "Then let's do it," she said. "Let's build something that actually makes a difference." As they shook hands again, Sarah realized that this partnership had become much more than a professional collaboration. Marcus had become someone she trusted not just with her career plans, but with her hopes for how she could continue serving others. In the process of planning their healthcare center, they had also been rebuilding their own sense of purpose and identity. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with regulatory hurdles, funding obstacles, and the complex logistics of creating an entirely new kind of healthcare facility. But for the first time since coming home from Afghanistan, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, working toward exactly what she was meant to accomplish. 6 months had transformed Sarah and Marcus from two veterans struggling with civilian life into partners with a clear mission and a growing team of supporters. Their veteran healthcare center had progressed from coffee shop conversations to a detailed business plan, initial funding commitments, and a small but dedicated group of healthcare professionals and veterans who believed in their vision. Sarah stood in the empty warehouse space they had just signed a lease on, trying to envision how the bare concrete floors and exposed beams would eventually become a state-of-the-art medical facility. The space was larger than they had originally planned for, but Marcus had convinced her that they should think bigger from the start rather than having to expand later. "The medical suite will go here," Sarah said, gesturing to the eastern section of the building. "We'll have 4 examination rooms, a minor surgery suite, and space for diagnostic equipment. Over there," she pointed to the western side, "we can put the counseling offices and group therapy rooms." Marcus nodded, making notes on his tablet as he walked through the space. "And the administrative offices can go in that corner, with the reception area here by the main entrance. We'll want good sight lines so the staff can see anyone coming in." The security consciousness that Marcus brought to their planning had initially surprised Sarah, but she had come to appreciate his attention to safety details. Many of their future patients would be dealing with PTSD, anxiety, and other conditions that could make them hyper-vigilant about their environment. Creating a space that felt safe and controlled was as important as having the right medical equipment. "Dr. Rodriguez should be here soon," Sarah said, checking her watch. "She's bringing the revised staffing plan and the latest funding proposals." Dr. Elena Rodriguez had become their unofficial third partner, bringing policy expertise and connections in the veteran healthcare community that had proven invaluable. She was a former Air Force flight surgeon who now worked in veteran healthcare policy, and her enthusiasm for their project had helped legitimize their efforts with potential funders and regulatory agencies. Marcus was examining the electrical systems when Sarah's phone rang. She recognized the number, as belonging to James Morrison, a Marine veteran she had treated in the emergency room several weeks earlier. James had become one of their unofficial advisors, helping them understand the perspective of veterans who had struggled to access appropriate health care. James, Saran Sorat, how are you feeling? Much better, Doc. Thanks to you, James replied, though Sarah could hear tension in his voice. Listen, I'm calling because I've got a situation here that I think you and Marcus should know about. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. James had been dealing with chronic pain from an IED injury, and she worried that he might be having a medical emergency. What's going on? Do you need to come to the hospital? It's not me, James said quickly. It's my buddy Tommy Chun. He's a Navy vet, served 2 deployments in Afghanistan. He's been having a really rough time since he got home, and today things got bad. Real bad. Sarah caught Marcus's attention and gestured for him to come over. She put the phone on speaker so he could hear the conversation. What kind of bad, James? Marcus asked, his voice taking on the calm, authoritative tone Sarah had learned to associate with crisis situations. He called me about an hour ago, talking about ending things, James said. I've been trying to talk him down, but I don't think he's listening. He's holed up in his apartment, won't let anyone in. I think he might have a gun. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. Veteran suicide was a crisis they had discussed extensively in their planning, but she had hoped they wouldn't encounter it before their center was operational. Tommy Chin's situation required immediate intervention, but the resources available through traditional channels were limited and often slow to respond. Where is he? Sarah asked. North side, about 10 minutes from the hospital, James replied. I'm outside his building right now, but I don't know what to do. I called the crisis hotline, but they said they'd send someone when they could. That could be hours. Sarah and Marcus looked at each other, communicating silently in the way they had learned to do over months of working together. This wasn't technically their responsibility. Tommy Chin wasn't their patient, their center wasn't operational yet, and they weren't officially qualified to handle psychiatric emergencies. But they were veterans who understood the particular demons that Tommy was fighting, and they might be his best chance for survival. We're coming, Marcus said without hesitation. Send me the address. 20 minutes later, Sarah and Marcus arrived at a rundown apartment building in a neighborhood that had seen better days. James Morrison was waiting outside, pacing nervously and clearly struggling with his own anxiety about the situation. Sarah had never seen James looking so rattled, and she realized how close to the edge many veterans lived, even those who seemed to be managing their transition successfully. He's on the 3rd floor, James said immediately. I've been texting with him, but his responses are getting shorter. I'm scared he's going to do something before help arrives. Marcus took charge of the situation with the natural authority Sarah had observed in him from their first meeting. What do we know about his military background? Unit deployments, combat experience? Navy corpsman attached to a Marine unit, James replied. 2 tours, saw heavy combat both times. He's been struggling with nightmares, flashbacks, the whole thing. But he won't go to the VA because he says they don't understand what he went through. Sarah felt the familiar frustration with a system that should have been supporting Tommy, but had somehow failed him. Too many veterans fell through the cracks between discharge and successful civilian integration, and too many of them ended up in crisis situations like this one. I'm going up, Marcus decided. James, you stay down here and keep texting him. Let him know that another veteran is coming up, someone who's been where he's been. Sarah, I need you to call the crisis team and give them our assessment when I get back down. Sarah wanted to protest, to point out that Marcus wasn't trained in crisis intervention and that they should wait for professionals. But she also understood that Tommy Chun might not have time for conventional protocols. Sometimes the best help came from someone who truly understood what you were going through, even if they didn't have official credentials. Marcus disappeared into the building, and Sarah found herself pacing outside with James, both of them straining to hear any sounds from the 3rd floor. She called the crisis hotline again and was told that a team would arrive within the hour, which felt like an eternity when someone's life hung in the balance. This is why we need to do what we're doing, James said quietly. Guys like Tommy, they need people who get it. They need to know that someone understands what they've been through and that there's hope on the other side. Sarah nodded, though her attention was focused on the building above them. She realized that this crisis was a preview of the kinds of situations their healthcare center would need to be prepared to handle. Veteran mental health couldn't be separated from physical health, and their facility would need to be equipped to address both immediate crises and long-term support needs. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Marcus emerged from the building with a young man who Sarah assumed was Tommy Chun. Tommy looked exhausted and fragile, like someone who had been fighting a war inside his own mind and was finally ready to surrender. Marcus had one arm around his shoulders, providing physical support and human connection. He's agreed to come with us to the hospital, Marcus said quietly. I told him about our project, about what we're trying to build. I think knowing that other veterans are working to create better support systems gave him hope that things might get better. As they helped Tommy into Sarah's car, she found herself thinking about the conversation she and Marcus had shared months earlier about carrying the weight of impossible choices and traumatic memories. Tommy was clearly struggling with similar burdens, but he had reached a point where the pain felt insurmountable rather than manageable. During the drive to the hospital, Tommy spoke quietly about his experiences in Afghanistan, about losing members of his unit, about the guilt he carried for surviving when others hadn't. His story was heartbreakingly familiar to Sarah, echoing themes she had heard from countless veterans and had struggled with in her own processing of her deployment experiences. I keep thinking about Rodriguez and Martinez, Tommy said, referring to fallen Marines from his unit. They had families waiting for them, kids who will never know their fathers. And I came home and I can't even hold down a job or maintain a relationship. What's the point of surviving if this is all I can do with it? Sarah caught Marcus's eye in the rearview mirror and saw the same pain she was feeling. They both understood survivor guilt, the particular burden of coming home when others didn't, and then struggling to make their survival worthwhile. It was a weight that could crush someone if they didn't have the right support systems. The point, Marcus said carefully, is that Rodriguez and Martinez would want you to live. They would want you to find a way to honor their memory by building a meaningful life, even if it takes time to figure out what that looks like. At the hospital, Sarah was able to expedite Tommy's admission to the psychiatric unit, using her connections to ensure he received immediate attention from professionals trained in veteran mental health issues. As they waited with him during the intake process, she realized that their veteran healthcare center needed to be more than just a medical facility. It needed to be a place where veterans like Tommy could find community and support before they reach crisis points. Thank you, Tommy said as he prepared to go with the psychiatric team. Both of you. James said you're building something for veterans. I hope it works. We need it. After Tommy was admitted, Sarah, Marcus, and James found themselves in the hospital cafeteria processing what had just happened. The crisis had been resolved successfully, but it had also highlighted the urgent need for the kind of comprehensive support system they were trying to create. How many Tommy Chins are out there right now? James asked. How many veterans are sitting in apartments thinking about ending it all because they don't know where to turn for help? The question haunted Sarah because she knew the statistics. Veteran suicide rates were significantly higher than civilian rates, and many veterans struggled to access appropriate mental health care. The system designed to support them was often overwhelmed, underfunded, and difficult to navigate. That's exactly why we're doing this, Marcus said. We can't save everyone, but maybe we can create a model that helps more veterans before they reach the point Tommy reached today. As they talked through the evening's events, Sarah realized that their healthcare center needed to include a crisis intervention component from the very beginning. They couldn't just wait for veterans to come to them during regular business hours. They needed to be available when veterans were struggling, whether that was at 3 in the afternoon or 3 in the morning. We need a 24-hour hotline, she said suddenly, staffed by veterans who can provide peer support and immediate crisis intervention. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. And We need relationships with other veterans in the community, people like James who can serve as early warning systems and provide initial support while professional help is mobilized. James looked up with interest. I want to be part of that. What happened tonight, being able to help Tommy, it felt like the most important thing I've done since I got home. Maybe that's how we all heal, by helping each other. Sarah felt a surge of emotion at James's words. He had articulated something she had been feeling, but hadn't been able to express clearly. Maybe the path to healing from military service wasn't just individual therapy and medication, but also finding ways to continue serving others who shared similar experiences. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Sarah realized that the evening's crisis had transformed their vision for the Veteran Healthcare Center in important ways. They weren't just creating a medical facility anymore. They were building a community support network that could provide comprehensive care for veterans at every stage of their civilian transition. The warehouse space they had visited earlier that day suddenly seemed even more full of potential. Sarah could now envision not just examination rooms and counseling offices, but also spaces for group meetings, peer support sessions, and crisis intervention training. She could imagine veterans like James and Tommy finding not just treatment, but also purpose in helping other veterans navigate similar challenges. Tomorrow we start incorporating everything we learned tonight into our plans, Marcus said as they walked toward their cars. This can't happen to another Tommy Chun if we can prevent it. Sarah nodded, feeling both exhausted and energized by the evening's events. They had prevented one tragedy, but she knew there would be others. The difference was that now they had a clear understanding of what they were building and why it mattered so urgently. As she drove home, Sarah thought about Tommy Chun, alone in his apartment earlier that evening, convinced that no one could understand his pain or that his survival had no meaning. Tonight, he had discovered that other veterans not only understood his struggles, but were actively working to create better support systems for people like him. Sometimes, Sarah realized, hope was just knowing that you weren't fighting alone. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the main lobby of the Veterans Comprehensive Care Center, watching as the morning shift change brought a familiar bustle of activity to what had once been an empty warehouse. The transformation was remarkable, not just to the physical space, but of the lives that were being changed within these walls every day. The lobby buzzed with quiet conversation as veterans checked in for appointments, attended support group meetings, and simply found a place where they felt understood and accepted. Sarah noticed Tommy Chun at the reception desk, where he now worked as a peer counselor, helping other veterans navigate the intake process and providing the kind of immediate understanding that could only come from shared experience. "Morning, Doc," Tommy called out with a smile that still amazed Sarah every time she saw it. The young man who had been on the brink of suicide just 12 months earlier now radiated hope and purpose. "We got a full day today. 3 new intake appointments, 2 follow-ups from last week's crisis interventions, and the afternoon group therapy session is completely booked." Sarah felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came from seeing their vision transformed into reality. The center had opened its doors 6 months earlier, starting with basic medical services and peer counseling. Word had spread quickly through the veteran community, and they now served over 200 veterans on a regular basis, with new patients arriving every week. Marcus emerged from the administrative offices, carrying a tablet, and wearing the focused expression Sarah had learned meant he was solving logistical challenges. As the center's operations director, he had proven to have a remarkable talent for coordinating complex systems and ensuring that every veteran who walked through their doors received the support they needed. "The mobile unit is ready for its first deployment," Marcus announced. "We'll be providing services at 3 locations this week, where transportation is a barrier for veterans seeking care." The mobile unit had been Tommy's idea, born from his recognition that many veterans struggled with anxiety about leaving familiar environments or lacked reliable transportation to access health care. The converted RV was staffed by veteran healthcare providers and equipped to provide basic medical care, mental health counseling, and crisis intervention in communities throughout the metropolitan area. Dr. Rodriguez wants to see us in her office, Marcus continued. She says she has news about the federal funding proposal. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had become the center's medical director, bringing her policy expertise and veteran healthcare experience to help guide their expansion. The federal funding proposal represented a potential game changer for their organization, offering resources that could allow them to replicate their model in other cities and serve thousands more veterans. As they walked through the center toward Elena's office, Sarah reflected on how much their partnership had evolved over the past year. What had begun as a chance encounter in an emergency room had grown into a deep professional and personal collaboration that had created something neither of them could have accomplished alone. The medical suite hummed with activity as they passed examination rooms where veteran healthcare providers treated everything from routine checkups to complex trauma-related conditions. Sarah paused briefly outside one room, where she could hear Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a former Army medic turned nurse practitioner, explaining treatment options to a veteran struggling with chronic pain from an IED injury. The key difference here, Jennifer was saying, is that I understand exactly what that injury felt like when it happened, and I know what kind of ongoing challenges you're dealing with. We're going to work together to find solutions that fit your life and your goals. This was exactly what they had envisioned when they first started planning the center. Healthcare provided by people who truly understood military experience and could communicate with veterans in ways that civilian providers often couldn't. The results had exceeded their most optimistic projections, with patient satisfaction scores and health outcomes that were significantly better than traditional veteran healthcare systems. Elena was waiting in her office with a broad smile that immediately told Sarah and Marcus that the funding news was positive. "We got it," she said without preamble. "Full approval for the 3-year expansion grant. We're going to be able to open centers in Atlanta and Phoenix, with planning money for potential sites in Denver and San Diego." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and overwhelming responsibility at the news. 18 months earlier, she had been a single emergency room physician trying to find meaning in her work. Now she was part of an organization that was about to expand nationally, potentially serving thousands of veterans who were struggling with the same challenges she and Marcus had faced. "This is incredible," Marcus said, though Sarah could see him already shifting into planning mode. "We'll need to develop training protocols for new staff, establish quality standards for each location, and create systems for sharing best practices across sites." "Slow down," Elena laughed. "We have 3 years to make this work. But yes, we're going to need to think carefully about how to maintain our culture and effectiveness as we grow." As they discussed the implications of the funding approval, Sarah realized that their success had created new challenges. The intimate, family-like atmosphere of their original center was part of what made it effective, but maintaining that feeling across multiple locations would require careful attention to hiring, training, and organizational culture. "I want to propose something," Sarah said during a pause in their planning discussion. "I think Marcus and I should spend time at each new location during the startup phase, not just to train staff, but to make sure that every center truly embodies the mission we started with." Marcus nodded immediately. "That makes sense. We learned so much from trial and error here that we can save the new sites from repeating our early mistakes. Plus, veterans considering using our services need to know that they're getting the same quality of care they'd receive here." Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself reflecting often on the journey that had brought them to this point. The center had become more than a healthcare facility. It had become a community where veterans could find not just medical treatment, but also purpose, understanding, and hope. Staff members who had started as patients often transitioned into roles as peer counselors, administrative assistants, or advocates for other veterans. James Morrison had become their community outreach coordinator, using his network of veteran contacts to identify veterans who might benefit from their services but were reluctant to seek help. His natural ability to connect with struggling veterans and his firsthand experience with both crisis and recovery made him invaluable in reaching people who had given up on traditional support systems. "I keep thinking about something Tommy said last week," Sarah mentioned to Marcus as they reviewed patient files one afternoon. He told me that the most important thing about this place isn't the medical care or even the counseling. It's the feeling that he belongs somewhere again, that he's part of something meaningful. Marcus looked up from the expansion planning documents he was reviewing. That's what we've built here, isn't it? Not just a healthcare center, but a place where veterans can continue serving others while they heal themselves. The observation struck Sarah as profound in its simplicity. They had inadvertently created an environment where the traditional military values of service, teamwork, and mutual support could continue to flourish in a civilian context. Veterans who came to them broken and lost often left with not just better health, but also renewed sense of purpose. I got a letter yesterday from Danny Rodriguez, Marcus said, referring to the SEAL whose life Sarah had saved at FOB Shank. He's moved to Atlanta and wants to volunteer at our new center there. He says what we're doing reminds him of the brotherhood he felt in the teams. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at this news. The idea that their work was helping to recreate the positive aspects of military community for veterans struggling with civilian transition was exactly what she had hoped for, but hadn't dared to expect. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself walking through the center, observing the interactions between staff and patients. In the counseling wing, she could hear the low murmur of group therapy sessions where veterans shared experiences and coping strategies. The medical suite handled a steady stream of appointments, with veteran healthcare providers treating conditions that range from routine physical exams to complex PTSD-related symptoms. The Crisis Intervention Center, which operated 24 hours a day, had already prevented dozens of veteran suicides through immediate peer support and professional intervention. Sarah often thought about the night they had helped Tommy Chun, recognizing it as the moment when their abstract plans had become a concrete mission to save lives. Dr. Mitchell, Sarah turned to see Maria Santos, a Marine veteran who had started as a patient dealing with severe anxiety and depression. Maria now worked as a peer support specialist and had become one of their most effective advocates for veterans struggling with trauma-related conditions. "What can I do for you, Maria?" Sarah asked. "I wanted to thank you again for everything this place has given me," Maria said, "but also to tell you about something that happened today. I had a session with a veteran who reminded me so much of myself when I first came here. She was convinced that no one could understand what she'd been through, that she was beyond help." Sarah waited, recognizing the emotional significance of what Maria was sharing. By the end of our session, she was crying, but they were tears of relief. Maria continued. She said it was the first time since coming home that she felt like someone truly understood her experience. "That's what you and Marcus created here. You gave us a place where we don't have to explain ourselves or apologize for what we've been through." As Maria walked away, Sarah realized that this was the moment she had been working toward without knowing it. Not the expansion funding or the recognition from veteran healthcare organizations, but the simple acknowledgement that they had created something that mattered deeply to people whose lives had been touched by war. That evening, Sarah and Marcus stood together in the center lobby after the last appointment of the day had concluded. The space was quiet now, but it retained the warmth and energy of all the healing conversations and connections that had taken place within its walls. "Do you remember that first conversation we had?" Sarah asked. "When you asked me if the work here mattered as much as what we did overseas." Marcus smiled, remembering. "I think I have my answer now. This work matters just as much, maybe more. Over there, we were trying to survive the war. Here, we're helping people survive the peace." Sarah nodded, feeling the profound truth of his words. The battles veterans fought after coming home were different from those they had faced in combat zones, but they were no less real and no less dangerous. The center had become a place where veterans could find the support and understanding they needed to win those battles. "What do you think Rodriguez and Martinez would think about what Tommy's doing now?" Sarah asked, referring to the fallen Marines whose memory had once filled Tommy with unbearable guilt. "I think they'd be proud," Marcus replied without hesitation. "They'd see that their sacrifice helped create someone who is now saving other lives." That's the kind of legacy any warrior would want. As they prepare to leave for the evening, Sarah realized that her journey from combat medic to emergency room physician to veteran healthcare advocate had finally brought her to a place where all of her experiences made sense. The skills she had developed in Afghanistan, the understanding she had gained from her own difficult transition, and the connection she had built with other veterans had all combined to create something larger than the sum of its parts. The center would continue to grow and evolve, serving more veterans and expanding to new communities. But regardless of how large their organization became, Sarah knew that its foundation would always be the simple recognition that veterans understood each other in ways that civilians couldn't, and that healing often came through the process of helping others heal. Outside, as they walked toward their cars, Marcus paused. "Thank you, Sarah, for saving Rodriguez that day in Afghanistan, for recognizing what we could build together, for believing that we could make this work. Thank you for reminding me that my service didn't end when I took off the uniform," Sarah replied, "and for helping me understand that some missions are worth spending a lifetime completing." As Sarah drove home, she thought about the hundreds of veterans whose lives had been touched by their work, and the thousands more who would find help and hope in the centers they were planning to build. The room had gone silent that night when Marcus had learned about her combat past, but from that silence had emerged something powerful and healing for an entire community of veterans who had been struggling to find their way home. The war might have ended for her officially when she left Afghanistan, but Sarah Mitchell had discovered that the most important battles were often fought not with weapons and equipment, but with understanding, compassion, and the unwavering commitment to ensure that no veteran had to face their demons alone. In that mission, she had finally found a peace that felt like victory,